Good day to everybody around the world. It's a pleasure to be here. As Ken said, I'm currently serving as the technical chair for the Broadband Forum, and I have the pleasure today of speaking to you about the certification and testing efforts taking place in the forum, and as well as touching on open broadband and how that kind of relates into a lot of these efforts as well. I've been working in the testing arena for more than 20 years now. Kind of a little painful to say that as I'm getting up there in the years, but you know, it is what it is. But it's spanned everything from ADSL testing all the way up through XGS-PON today, and now diverging into like the open broadband activities and open source activities as well. So without further ado, I wanted to kind of dive in a little bit about the Broadband Forum process. And I think that the SPAC session ahead of this really teed up everything quite well. You know, the Broadband Forum, you know, first and foremost is a collaborative effort between all of the interested parties and stakeholders, where it's really, you know, at the core of it, developing, you know, the requirement set and then the specification set, you know, basing on that on top of the use cases that are coming from the operators in terms of how they're planning to deploy their networks, where they're planning to, you know, move their services to, and bringing new things out into the world. You know, all of those use cases, those requirements, those specifications, you know, drive into, you know, the implementations. And, you know, one of the things that we've seen over the last few years, you know, and I'll talk about it specifically with the open broadband activities, but we've seen a much closer collaboration between those ideas of those use cases, those requirements, driving not only, you know, commercial implementations, but also the open source implementation. You know, and I see that as, you know, just the kind of natural evolution to, you know, the collaborative work with everybody kind of participating in both of those areas. And where that really helps a lot of what's going on in the specification work is in those cases where you do have those open source implementations, you obviously are starting to see, you know, those very early in the process, but you're also starting to see some of the verification and testing of those really early in the process. So if you were looking at the graphic at the left, I don't have the line on there, but you could almost think of that kind of like shortcutting, you know, back through the middle of that circle to feed right back into the specifications work. And that's something that I think the Broadband Forum has really done a huge job at, where taking that input directly from the open source projects and the open broadband projects and feeding it right back into the standards and the specifications projects before they're even published, when they're still there in their draft phase, to understand what works, what doesn't work, and what can be done better. And then, you know, in that last part of the cycle, obviously things get pushed out into the field, deployment, you know, rolling out the services. And then that's that view from the service providers and the SPAC, you know, essentially coming back of what's over the horizon, what's coming next, you know, and cycling right back around into all of those activities. So as you're moving from that specification to the deployment, one of the things that the Broadband Forum has really done over the years is looking for how do we create the capability to ensure that the operators have the equipment, the software, the firmwares, the tools that they need to bring things operational into their network. And a lot of that is through the testing programs and the test plans developed by the Broadband Forum. And many of those testing parts and pieces are really focused on ensuring that you have interoperability at all of those levels. Because if you can imagine what would happen if you didn't have that level of interoperability of having to, as you evolve your network, having to forklift, you know, large sections of your network every time you're iterating, you know, the technology deployed into the field. And obviously no one wants to do that. No one wants to you know, make that argument in that case up the management chain inside their organization of the amount of investment that it would take to do that. So if we want to dive into some of the specific programs that the Broadband Forum has, these are the big kind of things that have launched into the world with the large number of companies participating in them, and delivering a formal listing of certified products. You know, we started the GFast side of things. This is based on the TP 337, which is Test Plan 337. The testing itself covers everything from functional requirements through stability and robustness, performance, and then features, right? So It's kind of trying to cut the full swath across all of the desired and check boxes that an operator needs. And inside those specific testing, you're looking at whether or not something is implementing properly specific areas of the specification. So things like seamless rate adaptation or fast rate adaptation, ensuring that the devices are compliant to the transmit power specifications. That becomes very important, obviously, how the devices adhere to the various regulator environments around the world. And then, moving towards things like looking at performance, obviously the operators are needing to ensure that devices in the field are actually delivering on the promises and enabling them to deliver the services to their end customers and end subscribers that are expected there, right? So you're looking at things at the throughput and looking at, the performance over the all. And then, all of that is for naught if things aren't stable and aren't actually robust enough to provide that kind of customer experience. Because, as Mike highlighted in the slides, customers and subscribers, they expect it to work. They don't want to be an IT department. They don't want to play that role. They want, that always on connection that's there and readily available and serving its purpose. So that's where you get that robustness and the long-term stability testing that gets baked into all of these programs. Overall in GFast, if we're going to look at like kind of some of the technical bits of it, there's a few different generations of profiles that are out there now between the 106 megahertz and the 212 megahertz variants. Both of those are tested in the program. There's also some more optional features that are out there that have come kind of later as the standards have evolved. So things like CDTA, where you can actually have the split ratio between upstream and downstream being more dynamic to better match what's going on. So as we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months or so, the demand for upstream bandwidth has definitely changed a bit from what it was. And, everybody moving to remote activities and screen sharing and slides and video streams up, being transmitted upstream. So being able to move that split ratio back and forth is something that's important as well. And then, with all the programs in terms of the broadband forum, and this you'll see is kind of a continuous theme as we talk about all the different technologies, they're always under continuous development and improvement. So while we've gotten through issue 3 and we've got 91 devices certified out there today, issue 4 is already underway in the forum and has been kicked off, in 2021 development. So it's started to look at tuning up some things like the loop measurement accuracies that are being reported and put some specifications on that. It's also looking at better control over that RMC, which is, a pretty low level bit of it, but it's hugely impactful on the stability of the system. So they're being able to tune that a little bit better. Some of the things that are interesting, and we'll see it with respect to, this and Wi-Fi, things like loop measurement accuracy. These are the measurement parameters that are pulled out of the network that you're starting to see that type of information push into larger scale closed loop automation systems or analytics or machine learning algorithms that are trying to look for issues in the network before the issues actually happen. And so having accuracy on those type of parameters is, critical, because if you're feeding any type of data into those type of algorithms, the machine learning or the big data analysis, your analysis is only as good as that data is. And so driving the accuracy there becomes a critical part of that. And then last but not least, definitely shout out to all of the vendors that have participated in this and have their devices certified and available to the market today. So the set of collage of logos down there, as well as the online listing for the web link that you can get to today to see all of those devices as the certification programs march forward. So moving from copper to the fiber side, obviously, there's a number of different broadband connected last mile technologies out there. So the broadband forum is addressing all of those technologies. And on the fiber side, there's the 247 testing, which is focused on the ONU OMCI implementation. And so that's looking to ensure that the ONU is properly implementing that OMCI protocol, that it's able to correctly consume commands sent down from the OLT in terms of its provisioning and setup of that traffic forwarding plane, as well as, again, software management, monitoring all of those kind of upstream and operational parts of it as well. So both services and management parts. It has coverage right now for both GPON, XGPON, and XGS-PON. So it's moved all the way through and kept pace with the technologies evolving and being rolled out in the field, as well as kind of the form factor that you see of those devices. So, when PON started, it was, kind of more of a box solution out there. We've seen that migrate towards having both, business grade and residential grade devices that may come as like an integrated RG device, or devices that are having just a pluggable SFP, where the SFP is the actual ONU itself kind of plugging into that RG unit. So the certification has kept pace with all of kind of those differing use cases now, or differing deployment models that are being utilized out there. Moving on to the other side of things, where, if we have the certification focusing on the ONU device itself, there's the interoperability testing, which looks at how one of those certified ONUs actually interacts with an OLT overall. So the OLT being kind of in the driver's seat for the OMCI protocol, where the ONU is obligated to obey all of those commands. The certification 247 testing verifies that the ONU correctly consumes those OMCI messages and can implement and act on them at that services and the management layer. But obviously, there's some degrees of flexibility in how the OLTs can choose to use OMCI. That's where some of the differentiation comes in there. So at the end of the day, you still have the interoperability requirements between the OLT that would be deployed in the field and the certified ONU device. And so that comes down to actually having a test plan that's calling out all the requirements based on the PON architectures that have been identified in the broadband forum, like 156 and 280, as two of the primary specifications that are defining that there, and then actually having the test cases and the use cases that are verifying each of those topologies. And similar to the GFast programs, there is all of the collection of vendors that have submitted devices through that testing program, getting those up onto that website list that's available there to the link, and being able to participate in the program. So, shout out to all the vendors that are participating there overall. And service providers can leverage, both of these lists to essentially understand, what is the state of play for the market. If they're looking for new devices coming into their network and they want to, kind of shortcut some of the testing and reduce some of the testing load in their own labs, they can leverage the certification programs and the listings there to understand, kind of starting at a known base case from that overall. And really, that's where that collaborative part of the programs come in, where, the cases and the test cases that are being developed by the certifications are actually, handling the specific use cases that the service providers are feeding into the program overall. On some of the protocols that have been developed within the broadband forum itself, so TR69 and now the USP, there's certification programs for each of these protocols. These are actually the forum's first self-testing programs. So there's approved tooling that is available out there in the industry. Participants are able to use that tooling and submit their final results for review and approval, where those tools essentially focus their testing on the agents implementations that are running on the CP, the RG, the devices being managed out in the field. So if you're not familiar with TR69 or USP, these are some of the remote management protocols that are available, really to, starting with managing the RG devices, but with USP, we're seeing that obviously push further into the home networking or small home networking, business networking field, to enable that management of, the devices, the IoT type devices that are supporting out there in the field. So we're seeing the testing coverage, being similar between these two, different protocols, but, accessing things like, the core protocol, making sure that they're handling security and certificates correctly, making sure that they're, acting on the commands that are being sent down to them so that they're actually implementing changes, not just at the protocol layer, but they're actually affecting that change into their other networking stacks as required, et cetera, et cetera. Within USP also, the program does support a lot of the optional parts of the standard. So they're able to actually define different profiles and then slice that up that way. So that when you have different device types that are, whether you're talking about like a RG device or like a set-top box, and it might have different parts of the data model or different parts being supported, they're actually able to slice up that protocol and support those profiles on the different devices. So there are two sets of certification devices listed there between the TR69 and the USP ones, and we're continuing to again evolve those programs. So one of the things that our broadband user services group has done a great job with is keeping the USP test plan kind of lockstep to the release of the protocol specifications itself. So as the protocol evolves, the test plan does as well. That keeps it, kind of pertinent and refreshed to the industry overall. On the Wi-Fi front, so this is getting towards the newest of the programs that the forum has been developing. We've recently released the TR398 issue 2 test plans. This is focused on the Wi-Fi testing and Wi-Fi performance testing for residential and small home office technologies. It's covering Wi-Fi 4 through Wi-Fi 6. With focus really on performance of the RF layer, coverage, capacity, stability, as well as interference and coexistence with other devices. Obviously there's a lot of Wi-Fi testing that has existed in the industry out there, and the forum has really tried to ensure that all the Wi-Fi testing that's being developed here is complementary to all of that existing testing. So it's really focused at what an operator needs a device to be to target a carrier grade deployment, where the internet connectivity has kind of somewhat become synonymous with Wi-Fi from end users perspective. And so that's kind of had a knock-on effect to the operators around the world, where they're being more and more obligated to ensure the robustness and the capability of that Wi-Fi that's being provided to their end subscribers. And so, in doing that, they're obviously rolling devices out into the field, and they need those devices to be carrier grade devices. And so it's not only a question of, does the device interoperate and does it, provide X number of features or technology connectivities, but it's also how well does it perform? How good is its spatial consistency? If it's, face, direction 1 versus direction 2 to the subscriber's device, are they going to see differing performances? Is it going to have the coverage to coverage, the typical, dwelling unit or business unit that it would be deployed in? Or do they need to consider, working towards multiple AP devices to actually get that coverage up there? So those are all scenarios that operators are having to answer and direct that. And so the test plan really provides a base case grounding on how you implement that testing in a repeatable fashion so that you can actually get apples to apples comparison between two devices. And the way we've approached this in the broadband forum is we've really focused on keeping the testing and the usage scenarios very realistic to the end user experience there. And so while you may see a lot of kind of performance claims out there, from vendors or labs or read your favorite tech blog, and they're happy to call out multi-gigabit connectivity and wireless. At the end of the day, that's potentially not realistic to what an end subscriber is going to see with a 2 spatial stream device, because of the number of antennas that you can fit into a current phone or a current laptop. And so keeping things kind of focused on that end subscriber, allows the testing to really kind of dial into those use cases. I also, we're, not creating kind of the science experiment of testing. So there wasn't really a lot of focus on anything like 802.11a or BG, or uncommon uses like 802.11n, but running on 5 gigahertz, for example. So, keeping it, kind of focused on real use cases allowed us to kind of pare that testing down. And as I've said overall, so you've seen, that continuous development continuing in the other testing. It's no different with respect to the Wi-Fi testing. So we're seeing things like development of parameters and requirements and metrics on 6E or 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi, more parameters and metrics on mesh deployments, looking at backhaul scenarios. So this is where it gets interesting. So you may have multiple AP systems being deployed with combinations of backhaul. So you may have backhaul over a Wi-Fi connection, or you may have backhaul over a wired home connection. That wired home connection might be G.hn, it might be MoCA, it might be a wireless, or any number of PLC type technologies. And so all of those things impact the overall perceived performance and are going to be addressed, in scenarios being developed inside the issue 3 work. The other thing that we're also seeing is the backhaul scenarios are also starting to drive those higher number of spatial streams, right? So like where your consumer device, like a phone or a laptop, might not have the multiple spatial streams of 4 spatial streams. Backhaul scenarios absolutely would have that, right? And so in that case, those performance numbers start to become important. And then, like I was describing earlier for the GFast case, the parameter accuracy pieces. And so as we've seen a push to bring, Wi-Fi management into the domain of machine learning or AI, making decisions on, or tweaking networks that are deployed in the field, all of that's based on that parameter coming in, whether it's RSSI or noise floor or anything like that. And so having those parameters actually reflect what the current operating environment is drives that data back into those algorithms. And with good data going into the algorithms can better do their job, which better tunes the Wi-Fi, which then improves the customer's experience and the customer's expectations on their wireless. And so all of those things, fit really well within these programs overall. Shifting gears just a little bit towards what's going on in our open broadband activities. So this is something that Broadband Forum has been focused on over the last several years in working and setting up a number of open source projects, the Open Broadband projects. Really, this is kind of being done with 2 goals. One is to provide, the community developed set of resources for broadband, i.e. the open source, right? And so, we see this already taking place where the open source projects are being adopted and rolled into, the vendors' solution sets, as well as other downstream open source projects overall. And then second, it also provides the framework and the integration for testing overall in the OB projects, as well as testing the specifications that are the Broadband Forum specifications being implemented in those projects. And so by providing, that opportunity, it closes that feedback loop even tighter with the specification development overall. So some places that we've really seen that happen is with the OBBA project. So this is the Broadband Access Abstraction project, which is part of our Cloud CO framework, being divided in the Broadband Forums, SDN and NFV work area. And that project has fed directly back into those specifications, providing, answers and, in some cases raising questions about how the implementations were intended to work before the specifications even were completed or released out to the industry. And so it really does kind of shortcut that innovation cycle that we see there. We saw that both with kind of the core BAA layer, and then we've also seen it most recently with the virtual OMCI layer, where there's a reference implementation being baked into the BAA project of that virtual OMCI specification. The other project's OB USP agent, which is the reference implementation of the USP. The agent is the device that would be running there on the CPE device. So this is another project that's been up and running for a couple of years now, and it's made some great progress. It's another project that we see being directly consumed into downstream projects like RDK and the OpenWRT, where they're consuming that USP agent, able to kind of roll that in and make the RG open source devices able to support that kind of right out of the box, right out of the proverbial box, which is great to kind of see the success of the program. And then one of our latest projects here with the OB UDP speed test is a reference implementation for the TR-471. So it's the IP layer capacity measurements using UDP there. So it's kind of, how do you get that plus 1 gigabit measurement out there in an accurate way, where you're not seeing strange effects from like TCP windowing or trying to run a speed test over like HTTP or something, where you see that kind of starting to hit the limits of those protocols and their capability set. And then also aligns obviously with some of the other ways that UDP is being used in the network today. In terms of like how the open broadband projects have been used, one of the great showcases of that has actually been demonstrations that we've done for a number of years now. And so I wanted to kind of capture the last 3 years that we have and like where things have gone. So in 2019, we were able to show for the first time, a zero touch provisioning of a PON supporting multiple vendors, products, the OLTs, through the broadband access abstraction, right? And so from the orchestration layer, like ONAP and down, the OLTs all appeared very common and abstracted through BAA. And then from BAA down, the vendors were able to have their specific implementation with their own augmentations and flavors as needed to differentiate their capability set. We then took that and evolved that last year in 2020 to actually show a Wi-Fi monitored service. And so that actually started to look at using USP in the home to pull statistics out of the Wi-Fi, building on top of the 2019 work, but with that USB agent actually being able to pull in that data, pass it up to a Wi-Fi monitor, and then use USP to actually then control the Wi-Fi AP to tweak and make running changes there. That was also the first year that we saw the very early implementation of the virtual OMCI services being rolled into the BAA layer as well. And then now in 2021, we're continuing to see this evolve kind of one step further. So we're seeing that same kind of high-speed connectivity, but with a disaggregated access node. So you're actually starting to see parts of the access node being orchestrated in the edge directly as XNS. So, those are going to be cloud native containers, standing up things like DHCP forwarding and DHCP relay services, pulling those out of the hardware boxes and actually kind of disaggregating them into that edge cloud. And then that's being coupled up with some disaggregated BNG capabilities that we're starting to see for the compliant session steering. So this is where you might be able to actually differentiate the subscriber experience based on steering their traffic sessions to differing places in the network. And so where you may have a customer that needs a lower latency connection, whether it's for a gaming service or a business's grade service, and being able to steer that subscriber session to a better positioned or a better suited BNG within the network. And so that's one of the things that we'll be turning on. Again, this is something that's being worked at a current specification inside the Broadband Forum in our access architecture working group, but it's actually not able to, or it's not yet published. And so this is where we're going to be taking, looks at like that pre-published specification and then actually working with the open source teams to actually start implementing it and then providing that feedback directly into it. So I kind of wanted to just show the picture really quick of like what that's going to look like. This is where we're kind of aiming overall with Broadband Forum demo for this year. This is still obviously all subject to change, but you can see that it definitely is bringing together those open source projects as well as the closed source implementations, as well as starting to show that disaggregated, white box solutions overall and participating in the demo. And so this has been a great opportunity where we've really seen kind of rubber meets the road for the Broadband Forum's specifications. And it's been great that we've been able to evolve this over the last several years. and the work never really stops. And so, looking to where we're going for the next 12 months, we're going to see the application notes being published from the demo. So we're going to see, essentially the output of that, what we just talked about with the session steering, the disaggregated and the orchestration of the XNFs. The way we summarize that work is as an application note where we can kind of talk about the specific implementation and how it was accomplished. And so, what parts of open source were used, what vendor solutions were used, what were the APIs that were kind of pulled between those. So it gives us an opportunity to really document that. We will likely see the first implementations of VOMCI coming and being tested for interoperability at a PlugFest event. That'll probably be one of those virtual events for us. Since we'll still have travel restrictions likely for 2020, but that hasn't stopped us from being able to do other testing with GFast in other areas in the world. So we'll see that collaboration continue and branch out towards the virtual OMCI implementation. We're going to complete the first revision of our G.hn access performance test plans. So this is, kind of continuing to evolve that last mile testing programs to cover the technologies that are being utilized out there. And then we'll see the first carrier grade Wi-Fi devices actually being announced with the vendor partners that are passing all the mandatory cases. So being able to continue to evolve those programs and have more resources available for operators to be able to see the state of play of products that are out there and utilize that as they're making decisions for what they're going to be rolling into their network. Getting involved with the broadband forum work, obviously we've talked about this is all community driven. And so this is kind of the call to action to you all to sign up, participate, and get things evolving. We've seen the pace of everything speeding up. I think 2020 and the 2021 so far has showed us that things aren't slowing down. The use of standard interfaces and APIs is continuing to kind of drive how all of these projects and work hook together. Those are necessary if you're going to future-proof your network. And so the only way that actually works overall is, collaboration within the community. And the best place to do that is through the Broadband Forum in the documentation process, the specification process, as well as the open source solutions and the open broadband. And so we'll see you at our upcoming meeting. That's coming up in June for our Q2 virtual meeting, as well as our Q3 meeting in August, and all of the Zoom calls in between. And so you can join now. The operators are standing by, as my horrible engineering joke to end on. So thank you all. And I will turn it back over to Ken and Craig.